Hello, my name is Christopher Thomas. I'm the data compliance analyst with the Office for the Lancaster County Homelessness Coalition. This is a training video that will describe how to operate night by night emergency shelter projects in the Empower Lancaster HMIS. It's going to be kind of a longer video. It'll be pretty thorough. The next slide will have our headings. Depending upon what you're interested in, whether you're new or returning, you may be able to jump ahead to different chapters in this video. Each of the headings you see on your screen here will have an associated chapter with them. So if, for instance, you're coming back here, 6 months after I record this, and you need to be reminded how to create client check-ins, how to check clients into beds each night, you can jump ahead to that chapter and just watch that part of the video. In YouTube, if you're watching this video, you'll want to scroll down a little bit. There's only a little bit of like an information pane. You might need to expand it. And then you should see those chapters or potentially their timestamps down there. And you can click on them and it should jump the video ahead to that chapter. Now, on the other hand, if you're brand new, this is your first time working night by night shelter, it might be useful to watch this whole video from start to finish. It might take almost a whole hour. I haven't recorded it yet. I'm not sure how long it's going to take, but probably will work the best if you're doing this for the first time will be to watch part of the video while testing that in Empower Lancaster as you go, and then bounce back to the video, try the next section. If you've got two screens, you could do both at the same time, but there's going to be a lot of information in this video. I will try and lay it out as kind of succinctly and as most straightforward a manner possible. But it is going to require some kind of close viewing to get all the details here. And with that said, I'm going to start actually with some introduction here, understanding what is emergency shelter in HMIS and why is there this separate video about night by night shelters. And I'll explain as best I can, as quickly as I can. So, Lancaster County has the Empower Lancaster HMIS. We need to put all of our homeless system clients in there. And those enrollments are going to be in different projects, and those projects have different types. One of those projects, emergency shelter, I should say, has got two subtypes: entry, exit, and night by night. The reason those exist is because HUD has got pretty specific and strict requirements for how we do our reporting to them. They want to know not just who did we serve, but how did our system serve people and what were those kind of patterns of usage. So they want to know in a year, if you had this many beds, on the average night, how many of them were filled? On the night of the pit count, how many of them were filled? These are things that in the past they were a little bit less stringent about, and in more recent years they've become very stringent about them. So in order to satisfy our primary funders' requirements, we need to be able to say with some certainty who was actually in a bed in shelter projects on any given night. And that's where we get to entry, exit versus night by night. Think of an entry exit shelter as being something closer to a hotel style project, right? Think about TLC shelter operated by Tenfold. When a person is added to the TLC shelter, they're assigned a room. That room's got a door, it closes, it locks. They've got a pass key to access the building. If a person is enrolled in a hotel style project like that, an entry exit project, we can take for granted that every day they were enrolled, they had that bed and they were using it. Now, there could be a few nights here and there where they weren't in residence, but it's safe to say in an entry exit project that a person who was here one night will be here the next, and so on and so forth until I exit them from the project. Night by night is the opposite. Just because a person was in a project like the temporary shelter that Tenfold was operating, see the photo here, or the one that YMCA of the Roses is currently operating at the Clay Street shelter, just because a person was here one night does not mean we can take for granted that they'll be here the next night and the following night. They have been only in residence one night in 365 days. They may have been in residence every other night, so about 180 over the course of the year. This gets down to how do we account for utilization or occupancy? And if it sounds much more complicated for night by night shelter, you're right, it is much more complicated. But that level of detail is required of us. It's unavoidable. So all of the steps in this video are going to describe how to run a night by night shelter in Empower Lancaster. And let us say, okay, on this night, who was here? On that night, who was here? Might have been the same 80 people. It could be a totally separate set of 80 people. The system, the way it's set up, it has to be pretty flexible, right? Because people might show up right before closing who we've never seen before, right? Well, I want to be able to put them in a bed, even if I don't have the opportunity to do all of their intake information, get all their assessments done. And I also want to be able to serve people who come in sporadically for a week at a time, just as I want to serve people who come in and stay for 90 days straight. We have to have a system that'll account for all of those. So when you are watching this video and thinking through how this works, that's my best explanation for why it has to be done this way. So to use this video, to follow these steps, you're going to need a few things. And if you don't have them, this is a good opportunity to pause and ask your supervisor to ask me how we can get these things for you, right? So you're going to need to be able to log into Empower Lancaster, and you're going to need to be logged in as a YMCA user, because right now YMCA is operating the only night by night shelter. You're going to need to have a computer with a working internet connection, right? So you can write things down on paper, but it needs to go in via the internet to Empower Lancaster for it to count. And you're also going to want to know each night what is the expected number of beds that are going to be available. How many beds do we have total? How many people are we expecting to be returning? And then how many beds does that leave for new clients? That's all information that'll help you during the intake process or the check-in process for when people come in who you haven't already served, right? Because the number of steps required is going to be longer for people who are coming in for the first time, and it'll be really, really short for people who have been staying consistently, right? You're also going to want to be able to have blank intake paperwork with you, because the assumption here would be that you may walk a client through all of the steps I'm going to describe in this video before they even sleep in the bed, if time allows. So you'll want to have intake paperwork, shelter agreement, all of those things you'll want to have at hand each night before you start working your way through this process. So the first thing that we're going to want to be able to do is check enrollments. I wish I had a whiteboard. I want to draw a picture for you. So we have got three different things, right? We've got a client enrollment, which means that a person did all of their intake paperwork, right? They answered all the questions that we have for them. These being things like history of homelessness, disability status, specific disabilities, income information, health insurance information. All of those things are what we mean when we say an enrollment, right? So when I check my enrollments, what am I checking? I'm checking for the people who have answered the questions we require of new guests, and they've been input to Empower Lancaster, right? This is the single most time-consuming part, is doing the enrollment. The good news is you don't need to do an enrollment every time a person stays, right? Enrollments can stay open, and if a person only comes in sporadically, if they already have an enrollment from when they were here before, you don't need to do this step. It's only for people who are brand new. Now, the thing is, you need to be able to tell when a person walks up to the window, are they brand new, right? Are they already enrolled? Were they recently exited and now they're back? It's been a week, but they're back. That's fine too. We can reopen that enrollment. All of these things we can kind of get a quick look at via the steps I'm going to show you here. So I'm going to pause really quick so I can transfer over to Empower Lancaster. Okay, so here we are. We're looking at the Empower Lancaster front page. We haven't logged in yet. So we're going to click log in. And here we are. So we'll take for granted that when you're doing this, you hear my voice, you're a YMCA user. So this will already be set up. I'm just going to change myself to a YMCA user. And you'll see here that I'm in here as a case manager. That's how you want to be experiencing this, right? You can check that if you're not sure by clicking up here, hitting this little caret. Here I see my organization and my role. Case manager is kind of the default role. It's probably how it looks when you log in. The only difference is that other roles let you do some high-level reporting things, but case manager is the role that you want to be in, right? So remember, this section is about checking enrollments. There's two ways to do it. One, I'm actually going to show you. The other, I'm just going to describe because I'm very intentionally not showing any client information in this video, right? So we're looking at Christopher Thomas right now. He's my test client, but let's just assume a person walks up to the window and you want to tell, are they already enrolled in the YMCA shelter, right? It's very simple. Click on Find Client, type in last, first, and date of birth. Hit search. If the client's already in Empower Lancaster, they'll show up. And down here, I see this person was already opened. They were open today, in fact, but they're open in the shelter project. So that's very simple. This is a kind of client by client by client way of checking. It's less efficient as a result. If you want to get an enrollment list for the entire project, everyone who's open right now, you can do that very easily, and I'll show you how. Rather than clicking on Find Client, click on Operational Reports, and then click on Program Enrollment Report. This is going to show me in a certain date range that I specify and a program that I specify which clients are enrolled. Now, I am not going to show you this right now because this is live data, right? So there are people enrolled in this project. But if you hit search, you see my mouse right now, a list of clients will appear with their last, first, program, entry date, and even their status, right? So if this person was exited, they have assessments pending, those statuses will show up in this window. And if it's easiest to view it as a file on your computer, you can even download that list once it loads by clicking Page Options, Excel Export. All right, so if you want an up-to-date and accurate enrollment list, so you can tell, okay, of my clients who are here tonight, which ones still need to have their intake done, get their enrollment, their assessments done. This is the quickest way to get that list. Operational reports, program enrollment report, specify the date, the program, hit search. That's how to determine who is enrolled. Okay, so we just looked at how to check on enrollments. We looked to show how to check enrollments client by client, and how to run a program enrollment report for the whole program within a date range. We are now going to talk about client reservations. Like I said a minute ago, an enrollment means that a client was entered to Empower Lancaster and answered all the assessment questions that are required by HUD. Things about their homeless status, length of time homeless, disability status, etc. Reservations are not the same as enrollments. I was saying at the very beginning of this video that there are certain complications that have to do with night-by-night shelter, where just because a person's enrolled, we can't take for granted that they were in a bed every night they were enrolled. And that's why we need reservations. So what are reservations? A reservation is a association between a client and a project. Basically, you are saying this person's staying at my project for the indefinite future, right? We'll give them a begin date, the first day that they stayed in a bed, and unless there's a policy change, they'll have an open end date, right? So that's saying this person's staying here. This would become very complicated if we had more than one night-by-night shelter. But for right now, when you're listening to this, we only have one night-by-night shelter. So there's no need for us to bounce reservations back and forth for the most part. But this is signifying that a person's staying somewhere, right? We can literally make reservations that associate a specific person with a specific bed, but that is not how we're operating Clay Street right now. And that's why the next section will talk about check-ins, right? But to lay it all out as best I can, we need to enroll clients, we need to reserve clients. So that's their assessments, they're attached to this project, and then check-ins to say which nights were they actually here. We need both because they serve different purposes. As you do this, it'll start to make more sense. At first, I expect it'll be a little bit confusing, but once you do these things, right? Once you enroll somebody, which we'll look at, once you reserve somebody, which we'll look at, once you check someone in, it will start to fall into place and make sense because they serve different purposes. So we're going to bounce back to Empower Lancaster again so I can show you how to check reservations and print reservation lists. Okay. So here I'm in Empower Lancaster. I'm going to log in. We want now not to check our enrollments, but to check our reservations. We do that, again, making sure I'm in here as a YMCA user, which you will be, and a case manager. Click on Organization. This gives us access to this bed management section of the system. A lot of stuff gets done in here. So remember that pathway: organization, bed management. Some organizations have got a bunch of different bed inventories that serve different household types, and it can get very complicated. The one simple thing I can say is that the YMCA emergency shelter only has one inventory because it only serves adult only. It's only got one location. It's very simple. So right now I'm looking at that inventory. Here's its name. Here's its capacity. I want to know who's reserved right now, right? Who has YMCA said is staying with us? I can do that by clicking on these three dots here, if you can see my cursor, and then clicking on reservation. Now, it's going to automatically show me reservations for today between 123 and 123. If you want, you can open that date range up, but it'll by default show today's date. Now, I messed with these reservations a little bit on my system. It won't look this way on your side, just so that I could show you my test client and not pull a bunch of real client records, right? So it looks like right now I've got one client with an open reservation. That's Christopher, my test client. Here's his start date, and here is his end date, which is open. This tells me that we've basically assigned that person to staying here, right? It means that they got a reservation in the YMCA Clay Street shelter, and as a result, they're not reserved at 10 Volts TLC shelter. They're not reserved in Columbia. This is where they're staying for the time being. If I know that my client has got an end date, right? If they got a definite close on this reservation, I can set that. Let's say Christopher's going to be here for 3 months. Well, that's an option, but the expectation would be that you would leave these open. When you make that reservation, you'll have this enrollment field, right? So if I were to add Christopher's reservation, he's staying for the first time, I would click Add Row, and he would show up here. And we'll look at this again later, but just want to show you everything that's included in this screen. This is where we would associate that reservation with that enrollment. But for right now, all we want to do is look to see who are our reserved clients. The other thing I want to show you really quick, in addition to looking at the reservation list, which as time goes on will get longer and longer, right? You're going to be adding more clients than you can serve in a night, and that's okay. Again, that reservation is just saying this person's staying at Clay Street Shelter. They may not be here every night, but they're staying here for the time being until we exit them. This will automatically show you 50 rows. There's only one row right now, obviously, but you can scroll down. And at the bottom, once you get past 50, which again you will, there will be an option in this bottom right corner to change the number of rows it shows from 50, which is the default, to 100 or even 500. So when I do this, I will just go down there to the very bottom and set it to 500 right away. I want them all to show up here. There's a few handy things you can do here without having to print it even. The main one is holding Control F, and you can search for a client last name, first name, and that would also jump ahead to where they are in this list if you're curious without having to print the list. Now, printing is also very simple. I showed you a few minutes ago how to print the enrollment list so you can see who has their intake done. To print the reservation list, it's the same process. Click on Page Options, Excel Export. This is fine because this is just going to show Christopher. But now I've got this XLSX file on my computer. When I open it, every person with a reservation will show up here, including their start and end date. This makes it a little bit easier to sort through. I can go up here, highlight that first row, click Sort and Filter, and I can sort A to Z. I can search for names this way. I can sort by their reservation start date. This kind of gives you a little bit more freedom in terms of how you look at that list. So again, just to reiterate, we got here by going to Organization, Bed Management, clicking on the three dots, and hitting Reservation. This will show me today's reservation list. In other words, everybody who's got a current association with this shelter project, as opposed to any other shelter project. So this is the second step. Think of this like a three pieces in the pie, right? Enrollment is one, reservation is the other. And in this video, we'll talk about each night doing the actual check-ins based on these reservations. Alrighty, so we've already talked about an introduction to shelter, checking client enrollments, and checking client reservations. Now, those are all things you can do pretty quickly, and they give you the lay of the land and tell you, is this person who just walked in already set up? Do they still need to have their enrollment done? Do they have reservation or not? Those are all things that are useful to know. But enrolling clients takes some time. Like I said, the good news is you don't need to do this every time a person stays. In fact, you will not need to do this frequently at all, right? People may stay sporadically, they may stay consistently, but as long as they've got their enrollment open, you can pop them back into a bed very easily. This enrollment really just needs to get done kind of once per stay. Now, we may change the policy in the future to say, okay, well, the stay is this length of time and then it ends, and after a certain period, you need to get re-enrolled. But for right now, we are not going to worry about that. We're just going to look at how to actually enroll clients, like what are the steps required. Just a quick sidebar here, this takes some time, right? I would say conservatively 30 minutes to enroll a client. Could be 60, depends how talkative they are, how talkative you are. And as a result, you may not have time to do this live when a person presents, right? Person comes right before the doors close, and you don't have time to do it because everyone's busy. That's okay. You can enroll them later. But the process of keeping track of who's enrolled and who needs to have their enrollments done is going to be kind of an ongoing battle. You will see the steps. I'll show you the steps to doing this in Empower Lancaster. Some people would prefer that, to just do it live in the system with me looking at a computer screen with a keyboard and a mouse, asking you questions, and I input them directly. I think in general, people seem to prefer to administer these kind of more of like a face-to-face way, right? And write the answers down, right? So how you do this is a matter of preference. It may be a matter of YMCA policy. You can always do this as a paper intake form, which you should have access to blank copies of. You will also obviously have to get a guest agreement signed when a person comes and stays for the first time. So it might make sense to literally sit down across from a person and answer these questions, and then do this enrollment as more like data entry after the fact. That's fine. How you get here is in some part up to you. I will be showing you how this looks in Empower Lancaster because that's what it's going to kind of come down to, right? So, enrolling clients. Like I said, this can go two different ways. This could be literally you asking a person questions and you entering them live as you go. It may be that you chose to do it on paper. Now I've got the paper. I've got 10 minutes here to do the enrollment. I'm going to do that on the time that I have, right? Either way, it happens in Empower Lancaster. So I'm going to bounce back to Empower Lancaster and show this to you step by step. Okay, so here we are. We're going to log into Empower Lancaster. Again, you'll already be a YMCA user. I'm not a YMCA user, but I'll change myself to one. And you're going to want to be in here as a case manager. Now, the first thing you may see, again, we looked at this about 10 minutes ago, is this person already open in the project? If they are, you forgot to check, great news. You don't need to do anything for the enrollment part. It's already been done. Or maybe you already checked your enrollment report, like I showed you earlier in this video, and you know the person standing in front of you or the person whose intake you did, you know they're not enrolled. You just want to make sure you do that quick check first because the system can't read your mind. So you may start a new intake in Empower Lancaster and it won't stop you until you get to maybe the third screen where you tell it what program you want to enroll in. At that point, it's going to know to stop you because that person's already got an open enrollment. Rather than wasting the time, it's better just to check first before you start. Leaving that aside, we're assuming that the person we're going to enroll is not already open, right? So we're not going to enroll Christopher because he's, like we saw earlier in this video, already open and already reserved. What if we want to enroll Sheldon, our other test client? Well, we're going to go to add/enroll client, click on Express Intake. Now a new window appears. This here is what we call the intake workflow. And this thing on the left here is really the workflow itself. Workflow just means a series of different forms, right? Screens, assessments, all lined up in the correct order so that if you complete the workflow, right? If I get to the bottom of this and I hit save and it says at the top workflow is now complete, I know I'm done, right? If you get part of the way through the workflow and click this X up here or cancel, you are going to find yourself with an incomplete enrollment. So it is a best practice to not do that. If you start doing this, absent a fire alarm or something emergency happening, try to finish it. Just works best that way. So this is the intake workflow. All these fields are blank. We don't know anything about who we're enrolling right now. The first thing you will do every single time is type in the client's last name and their first name. You may also, especially if it's a common name combination, type in their date of birth and then hit check for duplicates. You'll do this every single time. In this case, just like Christopher Thomas, there's only one person who has this name, which is why it's always safe. If you want to do this, test this with a client, you can always test Sheldon or my test client. In this case, only one person came back with that combination of first and last name, and here he is. If this is not the person you're talking to, right? They've got a date of birth that is different, or you have their SSN, and that is different. You can hit this is a new client, and you'll be left with the same set of blank fields to be filled in. On the other hand, and this will be what happens most of the time, this is the person you want, you just click on them, and everything the system already has for that person gets copied. All the required fields, all the ones denoted by a red star, are already filled in. Now, if I'm correct in my assumption that you're going to do the paper intake first, you might know better, right? For instance, the last time this person was enrolled in the program, they reported that they didn't know their SSN, their social security number. Maybe you have it. You can change this to either full SSN if you have all 9 digits, or approximate or partial if you have the last 4. If a person, rather than giving you just their age, they gave you their date of birth, you may enter that. If they gave you a different answer to their veteran status. You can change that. These are all things that you can change if the client tells you something different. But in this case, we can take for granted that this person has had all of their fields already filled in. One thing you will probably want to update is their current address. For many people, this will either say 210 South Prince Street, which is Water Street's address, or it may say 308 East King Street, which was the tenfold temporary shelter address. You may want to just change all of them to YMCA shelter because that's where they are right now. If someone else in the system, not one of your users, but someone else, other organization, other provider, looks up that client, this now tells them, okay, look, they were at Clay Street recently. It's important information to have. The other thing that's likely to change is phone number. Or perhaps they had a phone number and now they don't. Client has no phone number, right? You can update these too. I wouldn't worry too much about email address. People may have email addresses. They may not have email addresses. They're not required. It really is just address that we have to have. So then, quick pause here. You can use your imagination. If this is not the same Sheldon, there's a new Sheldon, I wouldn't have all these fields copied over because I would have hit this is a new client. So you will either need to ask these questions live of the person sitting across from you. For instance, what is your birth date? What is your social security number? Or copy them over from a paper intake form that you will have already filled out. It's a good amount of questions, right? But everything that you'll need should be on that paper intake form. So for example, additional languages are spoken in the home, question mark, not a required field. It's not going to be on your paper intake. So they should match basically 1-to-1. Other thing just to point out really quick is this will always say self, right? Who is this person? They are the person I'm enrolling. They're a head of house. For Clay Street, we're really just going to be enrolling adult only households. And for the vast majority of clients, they will be single person households. So you'll be serving 80 selves, pardon me, in a night. You won't need to worry about having other household members. And I'll show you in a second what that is going to mean for you. Hit save to move on. This screen is where, if we were operating a program that served families, we'd be able to add additional household members, right? Or in this case, this person already has household members. At some point in the past, they were enrolled as a household with other members. You will, in 99% of cases, not need to worry about this. If you really wish to enroll two people, a couple, let's say, as a single household, you may do so using this form. You would just click Add Row, and now all of those same fields appear, including check for duplicates for the other adult member of the household. However, not to go off on too much of a tangent here, that can create complications in the future if those household members are no longer being served as a couple, as a household in the future, right? So enrolling people individually, right, two selves, as opposed to a self and an SO is always safer. But you may also find yourself in a situation like this, where I was enrolling Sheldon, but it looks like he's got other household members. That's okay. It's not a big deal. This is just saying who's in the household. It is not saying who am I enrolling in my program. That is a different screen. It's going to look very similar. So this is why I'm being very emphatic about this. This is just where we're saying, what is the household makeup? You will, generally speaking, again, in 99% of cases, not need to change this and not need to add anyone. So we're just going to hit save and move on. This is the screen where, see apply head of household consent. If a client is brand new to Empower Lancaster or has been in the system for more than 5 years, both of which are real possibilities, you may be prompted to enter the client's consent status. You can do this with the person live, right? If you're doing it that way, there will be prompts that will show up that ask, is the client present to provide consent? Yes or no? If they are present, you say yes. It will ask, did they give consent? And I apologize. This is consent to share their information in Empower Lancaster. And if they say yes, you'll be able to literally let them make a mark on your computer's trackpad or using your mouse on the screen, and that would be sufficient. My expectation, my guess would be that for most people, you'll be doing this on paper and they'll literally sign a document. If you answer the questions in the consent screen, is the client present to provide consent? Use your imagination here, you're not looking at it, but to say no, then it'll ask, do you have signed consent documents from the client? And you'll say yes. And then you'll have the opportunity to say, did they consent? Yes, no. What was the date? And then upload that file as a PDF. So those are the kind of the two options. In every case, to the greatest extent possible, please do seek to get client consent to have information shared in Empower Lancaster. What this really means is that if a person goes anywhere else in the system, right? Maybe they leave Clay Street and go to TLC, the Tenfold Shelter, or their transitional housing project. They don't need to go through all of these steps again. It's the simplest way to put it. When Tenfold goes to add them to that project, or when they go to the Echoes Winter Shelter, they'll already have all of that information, and all of the steps that we're just flying through now, they'll also be able to fly through. So it saves everyone involved time. And if you have any questions, I'm not going to talk about this forever, but if you have any questions about how consent works in Empower Lancaster, you can always pose them to me at cthomas@lchra.com. I'll happily answer them. But the shortest version I can say is, if you get asked for set of household consent, please do your best to get it. So I said earlier, it was important that we check just to make sure our client wasn't enrolled before we started, right? Because you'll notice 4 screens now, it has not asked where am I putting this person. This is where I say where I'm actually going to enroll them and on what date I'm going to enroll them. And you can backdate that if you want to. It's not going to know until this screen to check, oh, were they already in that program or not? So always check first. I'm going to add Sheldon to the Clay Street Shelter. I'm going to backdate it to Monday. Maybe I'm doing this after the fact. Maybe I did his intake form on Wednesday. It's Thursday morning. I'm going to enter it, but he was actually here starting on Monday. This is where you say when is his first date. Hit save. Now this screen is really important, so I'm going to start talking a little bit more slowly. This is the enrollment members screen. Choose the family members you want to include in this enrollment from the list below. By default, all members will be selected, right? I don't want to enroll Sheldon's household members because only one person is sitting across from me and only one person will be in a bed in my shelter. So I'm going to deselect anyone else. This could be his wife and kids, could be his significant other, it could be grandparents, it could be any number of other relations. You will only leave checked, right, that black check mark, the people who you are actually enrolling. And again, in 90% of cases, it will be a single person, not the household. So I've got my one person selected. I'm going to hit save. Now the final section is all of the required HUD assessments for this client. We see here that Sheldon has been assessed by some other project at some point in the last 2 years. I'm being prompted to copy assessment data. I would say, kind of as a rule of thumb, if possible, you should be trying to get fresh assessment data for clients, right? Asking these new questions because the value of the assessment data that we copy can be really variable, right? If a person's last enrollment was 720 days ago in coordinated entry, I'll still be able to copy it, right? But a lot can happen in 2 years. In fact, everything could change in 2 years. So while you may choose to select yes, done, and then pick which assessment to copy, and you'll see Sheldon's got a ton because he's our test client. If you have got a full set of assessments, meaning you did the intake form, front and back, you already have all of the answers you need to these questions, meaning you can just hit cancel and take your blanks, right, and fill in the answers here. It's going to kind of be a command judgment. You may find that the thing that works best, and I've closed it now, is to look to see, has this person been assessed by coordinated entry recently, right? Coordinated entry does all these assessments, all the same ones you'd have to do. They do them on the phone. They do them pretty well. So if a person's got a very recent CE assessment, right? This is the thing that happens all the time. A person calls 211, they talk to a coordinated entry worker. Coordinated entry worker says, "Are you aware that there is a shelter accepting clients like yourself at this address? And if you go there, they will take you." That person may come in and already have all their assessments done. So that's great. You can copy those, and that'll be good, high quality data. You may copy information that will be of lower quality. That's why I say, to the greatest extent possible, please try to answer these questions at intake and get a fresh set of assessments done. Because for many people, they will have been outside the system for a long time and a lot could have changed. So things like, how long have they been experiencing homelessness this time? Could be different, right? Their homeless date. Um, The number of times they've been homeless in the last 3 years might have changed. And here's the crucial reason why this might be important. As these change, right, as the person's date of homelessness recedes into the past, the number of times they've been homeless, the cumulative length of homelessness in the last 3 years, as it increases, they move closer to being considered chronically homeless. In Sheldon's case, he would not be considered chronically homeless because he does not have a disabling condition. I asked him, "Do you have a disability?" And he said no. But he has been homeless 4 or more times in the last 3 years for a total of 12 or more months. So he satisfies one of the two criteria for chronic homelessness. If that client had said yes, now we've got a person who is considered chronically homeless, meaning they are higher need, higher priority, and when decisions get made about who should be the person who gets matched with an open housing resource next, this will greatly benefit them when their name comes up in that conversation. But let's use our imaginations here and say, when he was enrolled, you know, 2 years ago, he had just become homeless only a week before. And let's see if I can make this happen here. And no one had bothered to change these, right? It was his first month homeless, been less than a week. Unless we make sure to update these, right? Maybe his disabling condition changed. These are things that are going to change as time goes on. More times homeless, longer length of time homeless, longer length of stay. All of these things are pushing Sheldon's priority up. His need is getting pushed up higher and higher. So there's real use, real importance to updating these. It's a long explanation, but you will be hopefully doing these live, or I'm sorry, doing this on paper, not live. So you'll have them already ready to go. You'll just be copying these over. The next set of questions here will be about specific conditions. And I think that DV status will show up as well. So is this person a survivor of domestic violence? If we say yes, then we get some follow-up questions. We get some questions about specific disabling conditions and whether or not they're chronic in nature, all of which are going to pop out as a follow-up question if you say yes. The intake form you have should account for this. It'll be bracketed out. It'll say mental health disorder, yes, no, expected to be of long continued and indefinite duration, da 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 da. So you should have all those answers already filled out on the form, or alternately, client doesn't know, client prefers not to answer. Next is the financial assessment. Pretty straightforward. We're looking at monthly income for a client. So you could say no. Do they have income from any source? They do not. You could say client prefers not to answer, of course. If you say yes, each of these rows represents a different income source. If a client has income, I'm going to check that income source. I'm going to select the interval, so how frequently are they paid, and the amount. This will automatically calculate to make the monthly amount so we can figure out later, is this person, what percentage of the area median income are they, what percentage of the poverty line are they. That information, let's just look at that. It also lets us later show progress, right? If a person comes to us with no income and they leave with SSDI, we have just helped them to gain income. So it's really an important marker for success, right? Again, this should all be on the intake form. Finally, we have health insurance. There's a lot of options here for health insurance. So these aren't all listed on the intake form. It will just say, do you have health insurance? If so, what source? So you will need to pick. If you needed to, you could say yes and then answer the other source. But generally speaking, we're going to be talking about Medicaid, Medicare, or employer provided. Just pick yes for all that apply and hit save. Now I see my workflow is not complete. Now you can imagine if you were copying over live data, take a little bit longer. Well, maybe not just as long, you wouldn't have to be talking. If you're doing it live with another person, it could take quite long, right? So depending upon how you do this, it might take you, it took me 15 minutes, it might take you 30, it could take longer, right? So keep that in mind as you go, you'll get more accustomed to the process. So hit done. And now I see here Sheldon back on his homepage. Sheldon's now open. And he's open on the 20th. So I backdated into Monday. So that is enrolling clients. Okay, so our next topic will be reserving clients. Again, reserving clients. This means that we have created an association, a reservation for a person in this project. It does not mean that that person will be in a bed every night. What it does mean is that that person is staying in our project, in this case in the YMCA Clay Street Shelter, until we end the reservation. So, described it earlier as being kind of three parts of a puzzle here: enrollment, reservation, and check-in. We talked about enrollment before. Now we're going to talk about reservations. The way this is set up right now, when I'm recording this on January 23rd, is that reservations and enrollments are not locked together. So you do not have to go intake, enrollment, reservation, check-in. You are currently able to do reservation and check-in without doing an enrollment, as long as a person exists in Empower Lancaster, and most of your clients will. So what that is doing is saying, this person was in a bed, I want to have them in that bed and check them in. I have not yet had an opportunity to do their enrollment, their intake assessment, do their enrollment. It would be nice if we could say it had to go in a certain order. In reality, I don't think it's feasible for us to say that, and that's why we have it set up this way. But if you're listening to this video months from now, that may have changed. But right now in January, it's a process that can go in either direction, right? Earlier in this video, if you haven't watched it yet, there's a section about checking enrollments to see who's enrolled and about checking reservations to see who's reserved. We just enrolled Sheldon, right? So we'll create a reservation for him. And then I'll show you what that looks like. And then I'll also show you what it looks like to create a reservation for a person who we haven't had a chance to enroll yet. We'll all be in this section here. Okay, so we're going to bounce back to Empower Lancaster. Okay, so here we are. We're back in Empower Lancaster. Again, we're looking at this as a case manager. We're in the YMCA organization. Those are going to be important every step of the way. So if you're unsure, you can always check that by clicking up here and making sure that you're set up that way, and then changing it if it needs to change. So I said earlier that this organization section is really important. So we're going to go back to organization. We're going to go back to bed management. And this shows me the inventory, like the bed inventory associated with my organization, talking about how to make reservations, right? So we're going to show you kind of the ideal order for this to work in. So Sheldon came in, we looked him up, we saw he already existed in Empower Lancaster, we saw that he was not enrolled in the Clay Street shelter. We want to serve him tonight. We had time to do all of his enrollment and intake paperwork first, so it's already done. This next step happens next. I'll show you what that looks like. Click on the three dots here and then hit reservation. Right now, I've only got one client reserved, and it's Christopher. I'm going to add my other client. Add row. And then here, I use this search button to search for my client. Last, first. In some cases, again, if it's a common name, you are going to want to use their birth date as well. Otherwise, everyone meeting those criteria will show up. You may also have a system design at this point that lets you write down client ID. This is their EL number. Only one of those per person. So if you know that, you can enter it here, and that will give you just the person you're looking for. In this case, because Sheldon's one of a kind, and I hit search, only one person is going to show up, and here he is. I see he's not currently reserved in any project, right? No one currently has him as their in-residence client. I'm going to click on his row, and now he pops in here. This is kind of the fork in the road, right? This enrollment is where I connect this reservation with the enrollment I already did for Sheldon. When I click on this drop down here, now I see that enrollment. This has now created an association between step 1, enrollment, and step 2, reservation. You might think it should be able to take that for granted, but it can't. It's not going to do that. Maybe someday we'll figure out a way to make it work that way, but right now it does not. We need to tell it that this reservation and this enrollment are connected. And this here is how I do that. You could, let's just say this. Let's say today is the 23rd, it's a Thursday. Maybe I'm doing my check-ins for last night because we were short-staffed. I might want to backdate this. By default, it'll show today's date with an open end date. We're going to leave that open, but I'm going to backdate this to yesterday because Sheldon, maybe he'll stay tonight too, but he stayed last night. And if he's reserved starting tonight, when I go to do my check-ins for last night, he's not going to show up because he didn't have a reservation yet. This is going to be an important date. Like I said, that end date you can usually just leave open, but this is very important. This is the first night that they're going to show up as being check-inable. So if doing it after the fact, you're going to want to make sure to backdate that. Of course, this works a lot better if you're doing it live, right? So if you have the time and you're able to do all these things in order on the day before the night when a person stays, this will all flow together very naturally. It's only the putting things back together after the fact that leads us to have to double check things like start date. So this is now a successful reservation. Everything's here. I'm going to hit save. And now when I go back, my reservation list, which is showing today's reservations, both people show up. If I search instead for tomorrow's reservation list, these people are both still going to show up because they have that open end date. You could also use this to look way far back if you want to. These dates can change. And again, you can print this list using this Excel export up here in page options. Now, I'm going to show you something else. Going to pause here. Remember, we got here by clicking on organization, bed management, then the three dots, then reservation, right? So that's how we got here. I'm not going to repeat those steps. What if I want to add a person and I haven't had a chance to enroll them yet? What does that look like? Well, this part's the same. I go to the reservation list and I hit add row and I hit search. It will show me anybody who's in Empower Lancaster. What if I look for a person and they're not in Empower Lancaster? And look, there's any Obi-Wan Kenobis. So I can't reserve this person. They're not in the EL. It has no idea who they are. You can't reserve a person who doesn't exist in the system. Right? Inevitably, this will happen at some point, and you will have to do this reservation and check-in after the fact. But more often, a person will already be in Empower Lancaster. They will have stayed at Water Street. They will have engaged with outreach. They will have called 211. We'll already have their basic information. And when I look them up, such as generic outreach, they'll be in here, right? So I want to add a different client, generic outreach. When I go to click on the enrollment, however, it doesn't look like generic outreach is enrolled in this program. What you'll notice here, there's no red star. I've got this set up right now to not require this. So nothing is going to stop me from adding generic outreach with a reservation tonight. The one thing that would stop me, again, this is in the reservation screen, would be if a person was reserved somewhere else. I don't want to waste too much time on this because this is not going to happen too often, but inevitably it will happen. That when you go in here, this person, see where it says current reserved in? They've all been blanked so far, right? Well, person may already have a reservation in here. And it's going to get gummed up if they've got a reservation in another project, meaning I'm staying there, they're staying here. And now I try to put them in my project. It will stop me. When that happens, you will need to communicate with your organization where they think they're staying because they haven't ended their reservation yet and say, hey, organization A, this client, in this case, Mr. Generic Housed, is staying with us. We are taking him on with a reservation. Can you please end his reservation? And you will need to rely on them, hopefully promptly, to end that reservation. But this is the only way the system has, the only way we have for not counting a person as being open in multiple beds at the same time. This is kind of a fail safe to keep that from happening. So if that may happen, you may get stuck. This is going to tell you where that person has been staying and where, as far as we can tell, they should still be staying. You will need to work with that organization to close that reservation. Shouldn't happen too often, but it will happen eventually. So this is how I create my reservations. I just created two, one for Sheldon, who we said is enrolled, and one for generic, who is not enrolled. Both works fine, right? They will both let me save. And when I move on to the next step, which I'm actually just going to jump right into, which is checking in clients, I'll be able to check them both in just fine. Right, so I'm going to pause here and I'll reintroduce it, but this will be our kind of chapter marker for checking in clients. Okay, so I said earlier that there's three pieces to this puzzle. One is enrolling, one is reserving, and the last is checking in. Enrolling is doing all of the intake information, getting assessments answered. Reservation is taking kind of, in a certain sense, ownership for this client. Like they're staying at this project until we exit them, right? The third is checking in. And the third is really important because it needs to get done every single day, or every single night, right? That's us saying who of our reserve clients, of the people who we expect to be staying with us, who is actually here on any given night. We do this by following that same pathway of organization, bed management, and then the three dots. But this time, rather than hitting reservation, we're going to hit slot check-in. Now, by default, this shows me nothing, right? I can't check anyone in. That's a search. And this is going to show me open reservations for the one date that I specify. I'm going to pause here and say this slowly. This date means the night of. So right now, 1/23/2025 is a Thursday. This means people who are staying on the night of Thursday, 1/23/25. Hit search, and all the people with open reservations, I see 3 of them, are going to show up. You'll see 2 things I want to point out. Well, maybe a few actually. One is the max, right? We said this is our maximum inventory. This is the number of reservations, and this can be greater than this, right? You can take kind of ownership for more than 80 clients. You just can't check in more than 80. And then this is the check-in number, right? So as I check people in, this number should increase. Another thing I want to point out, a quick way to tell at a glance, who of my reserved clients, my 3 rows here, pardon me, which of those 3 still need to have their enrollment done? Not Christopher and not Sheldon, but generic here has to have their enrollment done. This is not really the best way to find out, but you can always check this way to see who needs to have their enrollment finished, because they won't have an enrollment ID here. Every single time a person gets enrolled in the program, they get a unique enrollment ID. But let's just say tonight, it's a slow night, only 3 people are staying, right? And here they are. 1, 2, 3. All I need to do now is hit save, and it'll enter those check-ins. Anything else I want to point out about this? That's kind of it, actually. Just pick the people as they go. Think about this before I do that. You can use your imagination. You're not ever going to have 3 rows. You'll more likely have 100 rows, or eventually 400 rows. It's going to grow and grow and grow. Again, like I said before, at this point, probably 40 minutes ago, you can scroll through this, and as the rows grow, you'll be able to scroll farther down. Once you've got more than 50 rows, there will be down here at the bottom right of the screen, a selector, a little drop down that lets you pick how many records to show. That by default will always show 50. I have been doing this for a long time. I will always, every time, go down and change that to 500. Give it a second to load, and every single person you've got a reservation for will show up. Here's why that's really helpful. If I've got 3 people, I can just see them right here, right? If I've got 80 people to check in and 400 open reservations, I am not going to want to have to scroll through 400 rows looking with my eyes to see where is this person on the check-in list, right? I'm going to want to be able to jump ahead to them. Really easy way to do that. Once you've got this up, once you've changed the number of records to 500, all you need to do to check in the people, whether you're doing it live, looking at the beds and checking them in, you've got a census sheet, whatever you end up doing, all you need to do is hit Control F, and the search bar pops up, and just search by name. Christopher Thomas, got him. Sheldon Capiro, got him. You can imagine how this would let you jump across the screen very, very quickly if you just type in a first or a last name. Use whichever one is more unique. Time goes by, you may literally have 2 people with the same name. It's very possible. So you will still need to be careful with this, but this Control F search function is by far the fastest way to jump from one person to the next, so you can get through the 80 check-ins, or however many check-ins you need to do a night, out of all the reservations. You can hit save and finish the check-in. Another really quick thing I should have said a moment ago is do this in chunks, right? When you go to do check-ins, do not plan to do all 80 at one time, because all it takes is one missed click, you get jostled, the computer cord gets kicked out, you lose everything. So do them 3 at a time, or 5 at a time, or if you're feeling ambitious, you can do them 10 at a time, but do them in chunks and hit save each time along the way. That way, the most you lose as far as progress goes is 5 people, and you can go back and pick up where you left off. Now this is what it looks like, right? I've got my 3 reserved clients, all 3 are checked in. We're done, right? I won't do this, but you can this is going to be a subsection originally, I guess. You can change this date and you can look back as far as you want to look at who was checked in on what nights. And you can also do this if you've missed someone, right? You failed to check somebody in because you couldn't make a reservation for them because they weren't in Empower Lancaster yet. Maybe this person was here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I don't want to go back. I can go back to those dates, search, and do check-ins after the fact to get a complete record of who was in on a given night. And that's it. Now my 3 are checked in for tonight, and we're good. So the last thing I want to go over, I'm going to pause really quick, is exiting clients and ending reservations. All right, so thinking back to the last hour, we have talked about what Night by Night shelter is, why we manage it the way that we do. We've talked about the 3 kind of components to getting successful check-in for each night, right? Enrolling clients, reserving clients, checking clients in, and we've talked about how those would best be aligned or arranged and how they can be arranged if that doesn't work out. When all is said and done, as time goes on, we're going to have more and more unique people served by this project. We're going to have more and more reservations. We're only ever going to have about 80 people a night, right? As time goes on, we are going to want to exit clients and end their reservations. There's a few different reasons how you might do this. We may place a person directly from shelter into permanent housing, right? You could have a person in the project who has been in a bed, who while they're in the bed, they're also receiving rapid rehousing services. And maybe after a month in the shelter, on day 31, they get permanent housing. They move into a private market rental. They're no longer in the shelter. In fact, they're in permanent housing. Everything's going exactly as it should. That would be one of the ways points at which you want to exit a person from the shelter because they're not only are they no longer going to be staying, they're literally not homeless anymore. Another possibility would be that a person moves into a different shelter. Right? A person spends some time at Clay Street and moves on to a transitional housing bed, Tenfold's TLC. Right? That is kind of a one housing project to another. It's not permanent housing. It's a nice step along the way. We still want to close out their Clay Street enrollment, their Clay Street reservation, so that we sort of keep our records straight, right? It's pretty important that they only have a reservation in one place, and it's going to cause problems for us if Tenfold tries to reserve a person at TLC who's already reserved at Clay Street, right? So we'll come to an impasse there. But we also kind of have to try and keep our client records cleaned up as best we can. This does not mean exiting clients who don't come back the next night, right? It does not need to be anything so severe as that. In fact, when you look at system usage, many people will come and stay for a short period of time and not come back for quite a long time, right? That's all right. The other possibility, of course, would be that a policy is set. This is still early days, but a policy is set that says after X days, we exit clients who have not come back, right? We want to, for record keeping purposes, not have hundreds of open clients, open reservations who we're just kind of waiting on, right? That would be the other circumstance. So we could say to permanent housing. I mean, the other possibility there is that they leave the county, right? Maybe they are reunited with family in another county, another state, another country. There's plenty of good reasons why you might want to exit a person. The other one would be, like I said, project to project, right? They go from one shelter to another, one shelter to other housing project, like transitional housing. And then the third would be kind of a process close, right? They've been open too long. We've not seen them in a long time. As a matter of policy, we're going to close them. And then we'll just reopen them and re-reserve them if they come back, right? All of those are going to look the same in Empower Lancaster. So we will jump back to EL. Going to go back to the case management screen, right? So again, I'm in here as myself, YMCA case manager. I'm looking at Sheldon. So we're going to exit Sheldon. Sheldon is he's the first scenario or maybe the fourth scenario. He's no longer in shelter because he's now in permanent housing. He was reunited with family in another state. So if we check using the methods from earlier in this video, Sheldon will still show up as being enrolled. He will also still show up as being reserved. And that's all well and good, right? If he doesn't keep coming back, we would stop checking him in. He wouldn't appear as being in a bed. That's great. But we want to go one step farther. We want to say, not only are we no longer serving him, he's literally not homeless anymore. He's not being served in the system. And we want to get credit for the part that we played in helping Sheldon gain some stability, helping him get reunited with family, right? All of this gets done just as our intake workflow was kind of a one step. Just all the screen popped up and it had all the steps in a row. Same deal here. I just get to it a different way. Rather than going to add enroll client, I'm going to go to case management, and then I'm going to go to program enrollment. It's case management, program enrollment. Obviously, I have to find the client first. So do the find client to look him up. Here, I will see his enrollment summary. All the programs he's ever been enrolled in, along with their start and end date. These are in chronological order by program entry, right? So you may not see YMCA Clay Street Emergency Shelter at the top of the list because since he was enrolled, it's been 3 days, but maybe it's been 3 months or 3 years, it may be farther down the list. So you're going to need to look for the enrollment that you want to actually close. Many times, for many kinds of project, all you need to do is click enrolled and then complete exit assessment. That is not what you will be doing for this project. If I do that, I described earlier 3 pieces to the puzzle: enrollment, reservation, check-in. If I do that, I've only dealt with, well, there's only 2 that matter, but all I've dealt with is the enrollment part, right? He's still reserved. It is a little wrinkle, but if we don't account for it, it can cause problems for us. So ignore that altogether. Click the 3 dots here. This is kind of the other set of options. And then click Exit, Reservation, and Enrollment. So again, that's Find Client, Case Management, Program Enrollment. Find the night-by-night shelter, the Clay Street Emergency Shelter enrollment that I want to end. And then click on the 3 dots and pick Exit, Reservation, and Enrollment. This is one screen, one workflow that pops out here that contains all the things we need to do. This first screen is a little bit complicated to explain. It's safest to always just say family. I want the whole household to be taken care of here, exited, and have the reservation ended. Like I said, because one of the simpler things about this project is it just serves adult-only households, this is not quite so complicated as if we had, let's say, households, multiple adults, multiple children. Maybe I only want to exit one of those people or 2 of them or whatever else. In this case, it's very straightforward. We're just going to say family every time hit save. Here I see Sheldon's reservation row. Usually you would see this by going to organization, bed management, and then the reservation. This is the row associated with him, right? And here's that information I put in there. Here's the start date, here's an open end date. This is where I pick an end date. I don't want to delete this because while he's been reserved, while he's been checked in, he's been accruing emergency shelter bed nights in that reservation. I don't want to delete those. I want to keep those so that a year from now or 6 months from now, when I got to do my checking or my reporting rather, I can see those check-ins, see those bed nights. Keep it open, or I'm sorry, don't delete it rather, but close it. So let's just say In Sheldon's case, we managed to do it in 3 days, or in 2 days rather. So his start date is what it is. I set his end date, and now I hit save. So the reservation stays with its start date and its end date. But in the future, tomorrow on 1/24/25, when I go to look for my client reservations to see who needs to be reserved and then later who gets checked in, Sheldon's not going to show up because I'll be running all that for 1/24/25 and he's in the past, right? So all these reservations can stay in the past. We don't need to delete them. We just need to set an end date and then hit save. Once that's done, we are going to get presented with the same assessments Sheldon got when we did his intake. Before, at this point, almost an hour ago, I told you, if you've got new assessment data, don't copy. Just use what you've got. You've asked these questions. You've got new information. You know best. Use that information. At exit, it's kind of the opposite. We actually do want to copy all assessment data, hit done, and then go over here. I'm going to copy his entry assessment. This list, funny enough, sorts alphabetically by program name. So you'll actually always be at the bottom of the list, basically. I want to copy Sheldon's at entry assessments. And here's why. In a second, everything will fill in. Assessments copied successfully. Okay. Anything that has changed between entry and exit, this will be my opportunity to change it. Now, many of these will not likely have changed. Disabilities are not likely to change in the short term, right? This is also where I can say his destination type. So he said that Sheldon had moved out of state. He is now in a permanent housing situation. So this list, right, starts with homeless housing situations, goes to institutional, then temporary, then permanent. So we said he is staying or living with family with permanent tenure. We're going to say that none of these have changed. His disability status is the same. We're going to hit save. But here are two things that hopefully, or possibly at least, will have changed. His income. Perhaps Sheldon came to us with this amount, $650 a month on SSDI, and we were able to help him get a higher monthly SSDI payment. This counts. This project and the whole county, we do our annual reporting, gets credit every time this happens. Basically, one of the few things we can measure besides housing destinations and say, look, this person came in, served them for a certain period of time. They came to us with this situation, they left with that situation, and a number changed, right? Their income went up. Or alternately, or additionally, they gained health insurance, right? Sheldon came to us with no Medicaid, with no insurance. Now he has Medicare. Right? It's a little thing, right? But it does count, and it accrues, right? So over the course of the year, this project is going to serve hundreds of people. It's not going to be able to do this for everybody, but as many people as we can help to improve their circumstances, like their material conditions, the better, right? So if we help a person get income, perfect. Get them insurance, wonderful. Exit them to housing is perfect. Hit save. And the last screen here will ask me for his exit date. By default, it shows today's date. I can change that. But we're just saying Sheldon exited today. And now in a single workflow, right, only working with the same screen the whole time, I ended his reservation and I ended his enrollment. Now when I go back in here, he will not show as having an open program name. When I went back to the reservation list, he wouldn't be reserved after today's date when I ended it. So that's it. That was really the process. I'm sure that you'll have questions, you will have issues. My email address is cthomas@lchra.com. I'm always happy to answer any questions you have, troubleshoot any problems you have. I've really tried to make this process as simple as possible. I realize that's not simple, but it's as simple as I could make it. The main kind of possible issues will basically be some part of that 3-part puzzle not being filled in, right? I reserved my client, I checked him in. At some point, I got to go back and check to make sure that they were enrolled. I want to check a client in, but they're not reserved, right? You have to have these things filled in eventually. The system's set up to let you make this up after some time goes by, right? If I don't actually do the intake until till Friday and they were first in the bed on Monday, that's not the end of the world. You can still do it, still make the reservation from Monday, do their check-ins every night. All that still works. But as time goes on, we're just going to need to work together to try and keep things from kind of, you know, getting too messy, falling too far out of control. Thank you.